everybody, welcome to Emily Kate Made This. I am Emily Kate and I'm coming to you from Berlin in Germany. Welcome to my knitting slash sewing slash general crafty YouTube channel. This episode is mostly about my autumn knitting plans, but since I planned to record this video quite a while ago, I have since completed 2 of them, so I will also be showing some finished objects, but we'll just pretend they're part of the plans. So I have got the window open. You might hear some rain because it is raining for the first time in weeks. I also have artificial light for the first time in weeks. We have actually got autumn weather, which is quite fitting for the topic of this video. I have been planning all these warm toasty knits whilst sweating in 30+ degrees for the last few weeks, so it's kind of quite nice actually to talk about these projects with the rain and autumn vibes. So enough of my waffling, let's get to it. I haven't written any notes, so I'm just going off of what I remember that I want to do. I did think about putting a bundle together on Ravelry, but actually a lot of my patterns are not on Ravelry, they're vintage or just not there, so it kind of was a bit difficult. So we'll just bung them all in this video. Shall we start with my finished object? So I hope you don't mind the window being open, but it's really toasty warm in here and I need air. So it is raining, but hopefully it's not too loud or annoying. So my first finished object, which was meant to be a plan, but I'm really happy that I have managed to finish it in time, is the My Dear sweater by Tania Barley. And I will show it to you and then I will talk about the drama llamas, because you know, it's me, I always have drama llamas. Isn't it adorable? So a couple of years ago I made my mum a jumper by the same knitwear designer. I made this Into the Wild jumper and I had a lot of stress because it ended up not going great because I think it was something like a 17 stitch gauge in 10 centimeters using one strand of Plutalopi, and I just could not hit gauge, and I ended up making a jumper that was supposed to be size 4 but came out size 1, and it ended up being my jumper and I love that jumper. So in hindsight it wasn't so bad because I have a lovely jumper, but it was originally meant to be for my mum, so she got a different one where I used different wool entirely, some lovely Swedish wool, and I think I went up a couple of needle sizes, which she loves, and I knitted that all in Swedish wool and it's really toasty warm, which she doesn't really need when she's in the UK because it doesn't get that cold and she doesn't get that cold, so she mainly wears it when she comes to visit me. So this year I was like, I'm going to make a fingering weight jumper and it'll be really lightweight and she can wear it at home. That was the vintage one that I planned and alas did not work, so I have unfortunately ended up making a really toasty warm jumper, but it's adorable. So fast forward, I purchased this pattern and thought, okay, I'll go up, I'll put my colourwork needle up one and that'll be fine. And there's just, if you haven't been here before, I'm not a swatcher. Swatches to me are liars, tiny little furry liars, and I've never made a swatch that gave me any indication of what the outcome was going to be. And I genuinely would rather knit a jumper and frog back if it's not the right gauge than knit a swatch that's going to lie, and knit several swatches to see which gauge is going to come out. So do not waste your typing abilities on telling me to swatch, because it's not going to happen. And so I did not swatch for this. I used the recommended needles, except I went down for the rib. I did do it. It was a 3mm rib for the rib, 3mm needle for the rib, and it was recommended 4mm for the body and sleeves and 4.5mm for the colourwork. And so I thought, I'm going up a needle for colourwork, that'll be fine. And it looked fine. And then when I finished the yoke and measured it, it's actually really difficult to count the stitches because it's such fluffy wool. And I discovered my gauge was 7 stitches and the gauge in the pattern is 5 stitches in 2.5 centimeters. So once again, even though I cast on for size 6, I ended up making about size 1. And I can't be completely confident that this isn't a mistake because my mum hasn't tried it on yet, but I think it will be okay. Because basically, my mum is a small frame like me, like she's got narrow shoulders and just generally smaller, but then she's bustier and a completely different shape to me. So I thought the main thing is that I can get enough ease around the bust, because up here it should be okay, and the wool, which is Drop Sky, it's an alpaca wool and nylon or polyamide blend, and it's very stretchy, so I'm hoping it's very forgiving and it will fit her. Once I got to about here, I suppose, actually I can just show you, once I got to the end of the colourwork, I did short rows to raise the back. So there's a bunch of short rows that go backwards and forwards here, about this, a good chunk. And then I realised that my knitting machine, which I wanted to use to do the rest of the body and the arms, that gave me 6 stitches. So this year I got a knitting machine, as you may have heard. Do not worry, I will not only be talking about knitting machines. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll link it here. I got a vintage knitting machine and I've been playing with it. And I wanted to make my mum a jumper for Christmas with the knitting machine because I thought it would be super fast and easy. I have since learnt that knitting machines are not easy, and when you think something will be fast, it won't be. Modern knitting machines are a different kettle of fish. Vintage knitting machines still take a long time to make things, which is perfectly fine. My point was that I thought it would be really fast, and it wouldn't be. Then I discovered that the jumper I wanted to make her, which was vintage, because her bust size is a lot bigger than mine, and I could not fit it onto the knitting machine. There weren't enough needles, and it all got rather chaotic, and I ended up telling her that she wouldn't be getting a jumper for Christmas. And I felt so guilty because I was so excited and I told her all about it, and then I thought, maybe I could do a little merge situation. Maybe I could knit the yoke by hand and then knit the body and the sleeves on the machine flat and sew them together. So I did have to do a bit of finagling with my gauge. So I had to change everything, all the stitch count after the bust, and seeing as my stitch count was 7 stitches, it all got rather confusing with number counting, but I think I figured it out. I basically wanted to make my mum a jumper that had enough ease, so it should have I think it's 47-inch circumference and her bust is 45, so she's got about 2 inches of positive ease. Hopefully that's enough. And I had to do a bunch of increases just before I split for the sleeves, and then added it, put it onto my knitting machine, knitted the front, knitted the back, seamed it together, knitted the sleeve, knitted the other sleeve and seamed them together. So I am really proud that I figured out how to do this combination of doing the yoke on by hand and then doing the body and the sleeves on the machine. But I haven't yet found out how well it worked, because it's not as easy as like just doing it by hand. No, that's not quite right. When you split for the sleeves and you join the sleeves to the body and go round, you don't do that on the machine, so I had to kind of figure out what I was doing and how to turn it into a flat knitted project after it being knitted in the round as a yoke. So it took a bit of fiddling around with, but I think I figured it out correctly. It was the sleeve, under the sleeve part, to join this all together that I needed to make sure would work. And I was so stressed with yarn management for this because I went for size 6, but I knew that I might need more, because this pattern has kind of balloon sleeves, but my mum wouldn't want balloon sleeves. She would just want regular sleeves. So I thought I could save the yarn from the sleeves and then add it to the body, because my mum wouldn't wear a crop jumper, she wants a long jumper. So it should work out, but I'll buy an extra ball of wool just in case. And I am so glad, because I did not think I would have enough when I was knitting this. I had a lot of stress thinking I'm not going to have enough. So originally I was going to knit the whole body and the ribbing on my machine, and also the ribbing for the sleeves. But because, as I've mentioned, if you've watched any of my knitting machine videos, I can't do ribbing on it. I can do mock rib, but it does mean if the pattern says to do 2 inches of ribbing, I have to do 4 and then fold it. And I thought I'll never have enough yarn if I do that. So I just did all the ribbing by hand. But luckily this is a normal modern day jumper, so the ribbing is tiny in comparison to vintage knits, which is like 4 inches of ribbing. So I didn't mind that. And I did have to obviously change all the stitch count because of the gauge on the knitting machine, which I didn't realise would come out smaller, but it was on the loosest tension possible. So 6 stitches meant I had to 6 stitches per 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch did mean that I would need more yarn, and I definitely did. I have a small amount left, but not a huge amount. So let's go through the changes. I provisionally cast on the neck, I knitted the yoke by hand, then I hand knitted the rib for the neck, then I did my short rows and I adjusted the stitch count and increased to get the right bust circumference. Then I put all the stitches for the sleeve within the yoke on cables. I knitted the back of the jumper flat, then I knitted the front of the jumper flat on my machine, then I seamed them, then I knitted the ribbing in the round, then I picked up the sleeves, did some finagling with the increases that go under the armpit and knitted them flat, then seamed, then did the rib. And I've added my label, but I think I'll ask my mum to put it in properly because I'm rubbish at adding these labels. It's so floppy and it might irritate her neck, so maybe she wants it somewhere else. But my parents gave me these labels for Christmas. You won't be able to see them, but they say Emily Kate made this. So that is the jumper. If I put this video up after my mum has gone, I will add a video of her wearing it, if it fits. Oh gosh, I hope it fits. Otherwise I might try and put a video of me wearing it, but obviously it's huge on me. But I say that, it's really cozy, like a if drama unfolds and she can't wear it, I will wear it because it's still a really cozy, oversized, baggy, nice jumper. But I desperately hope that it fits her. I really want it to fit her. I am definitely curious, now that I've tried out this combination of hand knitting the yoke and the body, how it will go. And I can't remember if it was in the Shetland book that I have from Susan Crawford, or if it was in Shetland Island, in the Shetland Isles, or in Norway. I do not remember, but basically somewhere historically people were hired to hand knit the yokes of the colourwork and Fair Isle of jumpers, and then the rest of it was like they would then just send all those yokes to a factory and they would stockinette, and they would knit all the stockinette on a machine. I know that this was done somewhere, I just can't remember, but I feel like it was Shetland that they did this. So I don't feel like I'm cheating or doing anything naughty by doing that. And to be honest, it's my knitting and my hands and the health of my hands that matters to me, not other people's opinions. So don't really care, but I do like knowing I'm doing something a little bit like they did historically. And I'm really curious how it will work with other things. Of course, my machine is a fine gauge machine, so I can only do it for fingering, lace or sport weight, but not too close to DK, which is fine because most of the knits that I like are that gauge. But this one is super fluffy and it's really nice to knit. It's like a chainette thread, yarn. I can't explain it. If I took a picture, I'll put it in. But I really enjoyed knitting with this wool, both by hand and on the machine. It's stretchy and soft and just bouncy. It's really nice. I didn't have, touch wood for future, I didn't have any hand pain when knitting this whole yoke, and that was wonderful. So I desperately hope it fits her and that she will be able to wear it and not be too warm. My second finished object was supposed to be a whole video on its own, but it's really not. It's not going to be. And also it was supposed to be a present for my mum, but it didn't come out the right size. So let me explain. This was supposed to be on my autumn's knit list, but I had another spontaneous idea of trying out half-half, doing some on the machine and some by hand. And that is this Bestway 1141 glove and sock set. This is a photocopy that my dad did of the original, because the original is really fragile. I'll try and put an actual picture. When I was in Lewis with my mum last year, no, this year, we bought a bundle of patterns and this was in there. It was just a whole bag shoved with random patterns, some complete patterns, some just random pages. Thankfully, this was a complete pattern, and it has these socks which I have now learned are called Bobby socks. I'm going with this being 1940s pattern because it looks like 1940s, and I thought they were amazing. I thought I need to make these ASAP, and that's when I decided I'll try and make knitted socks on my machine. I will link a video here because I did do an episode on knitting machine on my vintage knitting machine. Knitting socks on my vintage knitting machine. After that, I then started to film to make these, but then I kind of thought it's not really that interesting, so I don't think it's worth a whole video. But I got really confused. Once I had finished the foot part, I didn't actually know how to proceed with the pattern because it really confused me. But after about 6 weeks, I finally figured it out. So I made them. You can't show socks in a way that they look nice. It's just not possible. This looks horrible, but this is the main part. So in the pattern, you start at the very top, and it's actually inside out. You start by knitting a tiny bit of rib, then you knit the Fair Isle, the colourwork, then you knit ribbing, then you turn the sock inside out, and you then knit the rest of the sock. But I decided to be really confusing, and I decided I would knit on the machine a toe up sock flat, and then I knitted the ribbing on the machine by knitting it and then dropping all the stitches and then individually picking up all the stitches one by one to turn it into ribbing, and it took so long and it was so boring, and that is why I do not do hand manipulation ribbing on vintage jumpers, because it's painfully boring and super fiddly. So I now know this. I have to, and I had to do it for both, obviously. But then I got to the colourwork, and that's when my brain fused out, because in the pattern there are no charts. It's all written row by row. So it will say 1 contrast, then 3 grey, 1 contrast, star. Repeat this. Then the pearl row, and it's all listed out, but then it'll say repeat from here, but instead of 2 you knit 3 here, and then when you get to row 6 you need to knit row 4, 3 and then 12, and I just couldn't chart it. I was trying to chart it, but knowing that you had to do some of them ending with 2 and some ending with 3, I couldn't figure it out. I know it would be really easy for many people, but for some reason I just don't get it. So I wanted to knit them in the round, but then obviously if you are reading this you have to read the chart, or you have to read the row backwards. So instead of it saying knit 1 contrast, you would say knit 1 grey, and that's why it took me 6 weeks after knitting the sock to eventually pick up and sit there with paper and pencil and try and draw out the chart. Failed on the chart, and I just decided I'm knitting it flat. I'm just going to knit it flat, and then I could just read the word written row by row, and it worked out a treat. So then after you have finished knitting, you can turn it and it will fold, and this is how I want to make a bunch of socks from now on. I have so many plans to make some more socks like this, and hopefully in my next episode maybe you will see the next one that I am going to cast on, because I'm excited for it. But let me finish talking about this. So you can see with the seaming, these were an experiment. My first socks that you saw, I tried to do this picking up on the first socks you saw if you watched my Can You Knit socks on a vintage knitting machine. I knitted them and seamed as I went up here. So this sock I tried to do it where you just have one seam and you have the seam on the inside of the foot. So this is technically the left foot, so the seam would be on the inside, so if you looked at them from the outside you wouldn't notice. The issue is, even though these were knitted on a tight gauge and they hit the right tension, when you do the heel and the short rows it just doesn't look great, and I'm not sure how to do it any differently on a machine. I know how to do it by hand to not get these holes. I really hope that focused, but otherwise I'll try and add different footage. So the heels have these holes where the short rows are, and when I put my foot in them it opens up, and if my mum puts her foot in, I'm certain that they'll just be too gappy, and so when she wears them in shoes they're just going to get holes really fast. So although it is physically possible and much faster to knit them on the machine, they really don't turn out as well. I have considered knitting the foot on the machine and then knitting the heels and toes by hand, but at that point there's not really much point to just using the machine for that. It's just nicer, more fun, and looks better to just do the whole thing by hand. But I haven't given up on it. I would really like to see if there are different techniques for the heel to do on the machine, because over time I have been improving my seaming. It's not great, but I'm improving on my seaming, and it does make it faster. So I was able to knit this section in a day, and I knitted the whole rest of the sock on my knitting machine 6 weeks earlier in a day. So for me that gives me 4 days to make a pair versus like 2-3 weeks. But of course, if they don't look great or they're not functional, that is useless. For me, I think it'll be functional. I don't think I'll make holes immediately, but don't love that. The other thing, when you do it on the machine, you don't just seam up the side, you have to seam the pieces together, and so you get this really ugly line where they join. You can do it on the base of the foot, but the one time I tried to do this, the whole sock was off because you knit the heel on one side of the machine and the toe on the other side. I will try and put a video if I have taken one. But when I folded them, the whole sock was disjointed and weird, so I ended up just doing it all in one, and then you get that on the top of the foot, which is very ugly. I'm curious if I did this in a different colour, if it would be less obvious. But I did Kitchener stitch a couple of them and they were horrible, and it took so long. So this one was a 3-needle bind off, and it's equally as horrible but nicer to knit. So there's a lot more practice and experimentation to do with the machine, but the main thing when these are tucked into slippers or shoes is that you see this. This is the best thing ever. I love this very much, so I'm very happy. So they were an October plan, which I have now done, but they're not for my mum anymore. But I did cast on another pair, but they're in the car. It's basically those but reversed, and I can show you those in the upcoming video. So that is a plan, and half sort of executed, but now I have another one, and I have another pair of socks that I want to cast on that will look like this, but gosh, that clashes intensely. I want to make the, what are they called? Batty Socks by Stone Knits, using this and obviously black for the bats, but just do the colour work on here, and the rest will probably be orange with black heels and black toes. I think they would look super fun. There's just one thing I haven't figured out yet. Interestingly enough, when I was knitting these flat, it was really enjoyable. I knitted them flat, and you just go across the needles. Then I started knitting a new pair, but following the pattern this time and starting at the top and not starting at the bottom and knitting down. I did it in the round with magic loop, and it is so like fiddly and finicky. I haven't done magic loop in so long because I've been knitting whole circumference jumpers in the round, or knitting flat or seaming, or using my machine. It's been ages since I did magic loop and it's really annoying. And I hadn't noticed this, I just kind of get used to it. But when I was doing the other sock, oh, it took so long. So I'm actually considering knitting the bats flat and seaming up the side, and then once I've finished the colourwork I will knit, like go into the round and do all this, the rest by hand in the round. But I might actually do the colourwork flat, which is very new. This is a new thing for me, that I'm enjoying flat and enjoying flat colourwork. I know that there are lots of techniques that you can do with small circumference, but I've tried the small 9-inch circulars, which I used to love when I knitted English style, but I just physically cannot hold the needles when I do it now, because I now knit like Norwegian continental style. I don't really know the name of it. I just knit how I knit, but I use my left hand now. And I cannot physically hold the needles, so that's out the window. DPNs are the devil and I never want to see them again. I don't like DPNs. So the only option is flat or magic loop. So I think I might do flat bats, then go into the round. And there's also a technique that I want to try where you knit colourwork. I don't know how to explain it. I was watching one of my favourite knitting podcasters, Anne from My Knit Corner. I'm going to get that right. My North Knit Corner. I will link her below. She was knitting something a while ago using a technique for colourwork where you don't knit flat. You don't have to purl the colourwork flat, but you knit it kind of backwards, and I'm so intrigued. The tutorial was in Norwegian, but I'm pretty sure I can figure out what she's doing through the tutorial. Anne linked it in one of her videos, so I have to go find that and then watch it. And then the next time, if I have done it and succeeded, I will link it for you there as well. But if you can't wait, go check out Anne's YouTube. I want to try that, so I might try that technique for these, because it's still knitted flat, but it's knitted, like all the colour work will be knitted and not purled. I don't know if any of that made sense. I really hope it did. So that is the first plan that hasn't been started that I want to give a go, and I'm hoping I can start that very soon. The next plan are some slippers, and I have mentioned them before so I won't go on, but they're the Juliette Slippers. Here's a picture. I did cast on the toe, or the heel. I cast on the heel with my mum last year, so I'm hoping that we will start those next week, because my mum is coming to visit, and hopefully I will get those done this year, hopefully this autumn, because I have the wool and I have started. I just stopped because in the pattern it said something like the main colour was red, and then in the chart it gave it the opposite, where it said increase or decrease in the main colour, and it was all white, and I got super confused, and I contacted the designer and she said, oh, I knitted them like this, but when I wrote the chart out I changed and swapped it over. So there's a reason I was confused. So I've got to remember now what decision I came to. I think I decided I would stick to red being the main colour and do all the increases in that, so when I pick that project up, I hope that all the information comes back to me and I can continue on those. So that is one project. I have another vintage knit that I want to do. I will put a picture. I'll put a picture up because I don't have the pattern next to me, but I purchased this pattern on eBay, and it's Swedish bonnets. But different to the ones that I made before. I made one here, I'll link it. These ones are more like well, they're called caps, but I feel like there are so many terminologies for hats that it gets incredibly confusing. Like, to me a cap is like a baseball cap, but apparently a cap can also be one that ties under your neck, but I would call that a bonnet, so I don't know. There are two in the pattern and I would like to try both, but we'll see. I haven't decided on the yarn because I originally had this brushed alpaca in mind, but the pattern is for fuzzy wuzzy Angora and it's more like a fingering weight yarn, whereas the drops brushed alpaca is thicker. That requires 5mm needles, so I don't think that's going to work. So I have to have a little hunt through my stash and see what I have that I could use to make it. But, or make them really. I want to make them both. They look delightful. So both of them are on the list, but I'll be happy if I just make one. And I believe this was on my make 9, I think, is the Selbu Coat from Skeindeer Knits. I have all the yarn, I have the pattern, I just have to do it. I have to cast on, and I think I will bring it with me on holiday and do it there because I have a lot of car time and ferry time to do it. Because if you didn't know, I am going to Denmark and Sweden next month and I'm really excited, and I think this could be a good project to bring with because the ferry back from Sweden to Germany is 6 hours and I'm gonna need some entertainment. So this one I've got Navia Trio and it's leftover yarn from when I tried to make my husband a jumper and failed immensely, and I didn't know what to do with all of this wool. So that is now the plan. It's perfect colours because it's green and white, and I have, hopefully, assuming my gauge is on point, I should have the exact right amount. So that is my plan. I also purchased another pattern for my knitting machine, which I got on Etsy. It's not for my knitting machine, but I'm hoping that I can translate the language into mine because it's still a flat bed knitting machine. It's a square beret, and that is exciting to me. I've tried doing a very similar technique that it uses. It's this like a short row technique that you go backwards and forwards and it will eventually make a square. But when I tried it for a sock section, or I don't even know what I was doing. I know I tried to do it and failed, but hopefully with this pattern guiding me, I will have more success. And I'd like to use some leftover wool from the cardigan that I made, and then it can match. And it will be a lot more light and delicate because I have an amazing beret that I love to look at visually, but it looks so ridiculous on my head. I look like an angel, like it's just so perfectly round and stiff and sits like a halo around my head, and I'd like something that just didn't look like that. So I think a square hat sounds very intriguing. That is on the list. And I have a couple of mittens on my list, and the Crafter's Tale podcast released some Tannenbaum mittens and some night. They were like, yeah, I'll just put pictures. She released these really, really lovely patterns and I purchased them last year when she had a sale, and one or both would be amazing to have this autumn and winter. Some of these patterns might be shifted onto winter plans, but I like the idea of having the Christmas mittens beforehand because then I could wear them in November, December, and they're adorable. So they're also knitted with thicker wool. I think it's a worsted weight, so they should technically knit up faster, but do get a lot more hand pain when I knit with bigger needles and thicker wool. So it might not actually work out, but maybe I'll have to just change it to be fingering weight or sport weight or something. But anyway, that's that's on the list. And what was the other? There's another pattern on my list. Oh, I really wanted to knit the Otra, is it Otra? Yes, the Otra jumper by Skeindeer, and it's a drop shoulder jumper, but I didn't buy the pattern when she had a sale last year, and I do regret not doing that. And I'm really trying not to buy new patterns when I have patterns that I could knit, so I don't need to buy more. But I really like the idea of that jumper because it looks really cozy. I have a lot of vintage jumpers and it would be nice just to have a cozy jumper to throw on sometimes. So that's on the, like, if I do really well on the plans, then I'll buy the pattern and then I might make that. I do have some wool in mind, and it is Danish, so it would be kind of nice to have it on holiday. But anyway, that's like a maybe plan. What else? So they're all the ones I can remember off the top of my head, what I want to do. Of course, there are always many patterns that I want to knit and make and do and all the things, but at the moment they're like the at the front of my mind patterns. And one extra plan that isn't really a plan, it's already in action, but has been for a while because I got stuck, is my victory jumper. I have mentioned this a couple of times. It's definitely been on pretty much every list that I have mentioned. I've discovered the reason why I'm struggling with this. It's not the pattern, it's not the wool, it's not the needles, it's the loop. What I was just saying to you about with the socks. I'm trying to balance all this yarn on me. I realised that the reason I'm not enjoying knitting them, the sleeve, knitting it, is because of having to move the stitches around every time I get to the end. And I have this new technique that I've talked about a few times where instead of just jumping straight from this needle to this one, you pull the needle out and then you leave about 2 or 3 stitches, then pull the loop out. That way you don't get this big jump between the stitches and you don't get this huge ladder that goes down. So although it works out really well and I like the technique, I don't enjoy, at the moment, I'm not enjoying knitting with this fiddliness. And I'm really regretting that I didn't just knit these flat, because the pattern is written flat and it would have just been so much easier to do it. But I don't want to rip this out because this has taken me ages. Ages and ages. Not only just the knitting part, but the time and the brain motivation to do it. And I'm just going to suffer through, but take note that for later, I don't want to do that again. Either I have to knit them flat, or they have to be wide enough that I can knit them on a small circumference needle that isn't too small, because as I said with socks, I can't do it when it's too small. So it should be okay for the body because that's on a cable and it will go all the way around and I'll just be knitting in a tube. But yeah, for some reason at the moment magic loop is annoying me, but I know at some point it will be fine. But I would really like to get this jumper knitted, especially for the winter, because this is Norwegian wool and it will be really warm, and I'm making them long sleeves, not long sleeved, and oh, I just really want it done. I'm going to preliminarily block this when I've done a little bit more, because I think my gauge is off in comparison to what it should be, which is really surprising to me because I'm actually using thinner wool than normal. Most of my vintage knits I use sport weight wool, so I have to adjust all the calculations to the whole pattern to make sure it will fit, even though the pattern itself, if I followed it, would fit. Like it's a 32 or 34 inch bust, which would fit me perfectly. But then when I use sport weight wool, I'm going to end up making like a 38 inch bust or 40 if I followed the pattern. So I adjust the pattern, but in this case, this is thin wool, so I technically didn't need to change anything, so I followed the pattern, but it seems like it might be a bit roomy. So obviously it's not blocked, and there's a good inch of space, so I'm a bit concerned about the body. So I'm going to block this, my voice is going, I'm going to block this and then see what the gauge is, and then I can adjust the stitch count for the body if I need to. So that's also a plan, and hopefully I can bring this with me on holiday as well. Okay, those are all my plans. I hope that all made sense. I feel like I talked a lot and fast and maybe not always cohesive, but hopefully you have got an idea of the plans, and hopefully I manage to succeed in, I'd like to say all of them, but maybe that's a bit optimistic. Most of them, a vast majority of them, I would like to succeed in. I would love to know if you are making any of the same things or what your plans are, whether vintage or non-vintage. Not that I need any more ideas, but alas, I would love to know anyway. So let me know in the comments, or you can go follow me over on Instagram or on Ravelry and let me know there. Speaking of Instagram and Ravelry, I have completely forgotten for ages and ages to mention. I have a vintage make-along, which I keep forgetting to mention. So over on Ravelry and on Instagram, mostly on Instagram, I'm doing a really casual make-along where you can add your knitting projects, crochet, sewing, for anything between 1920s to 1960s. Just a nice place so we can see each other's makes. There are some really beautiful makes, and oh, the inspiration's too much. So if you want to participate in that, you just need to add the hashtag, and you can @ me and then I'll see it, because the algorithm on Instagram can be a bit of a pain and doesn't always show all of the posts. So at least if you tag me, I will see it, and then I can share it in my highlights. So if anyone wants to go through and look at them all, they will find you. It's for finished objects or works in progress. It's really casual, just a nice place to share our makes. And I think that's you, Pauline, messaging me. So I will wrap that up there. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!